All are requested to rise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलति तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे थैंक यू
I invite Honorable Governor to kindly light the traditional lamp and to offer floral tributes to Bharadamba. Thank you, sir. I invite Dr. Devendra Kumar Dodavat, Additional Chief Secretary to Governor, for welcome speech.
Respected Shri Rajendra Vishwanath Arlikarji, Honorable Governor of Kerala and Honorable Chancellor of Universities in Kerala, our esteemed guests, Shri Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran ji, and dear friends, good evening to all. Today we have assembled here to enrich ourselves from the nuggets of wisdom from the distinguished economist Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran ji. He is here with us on the invitation of the Honorable Governor of Kerala to deliver a talk on the topic Global Economic Trends, India's Challenges and Prospects. At the outset, let me give a brief introduction of our esteemed guest. Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran ji is a noted author, teacher, and presently serving as the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. He is a postgraduate diploma holder in management from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and earned his doctoral degree from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. He was the Dean of the IFMR Graduate School of Business and a distinguished visiting professor of economics, and has taught in premier institutes like IIMs and Singapore Management University. He served as a currency economist at the Union Bank of Switzerland, head of research and investment consulting in Credit Suisse Private Banking in Asia, and head of Asia Research and Global Chief Investment Officer at Bank Julius Baer. He has been independent director on the board of many reputed companies. He has written a weekly Mint column for 15 years and co-authored many books. He was a part of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council before becoming CEA to the Government of India in 2022. As Chief Economic Advisor, Shri Nageswaran has focused on technological innovation in economic forecasting and has ardently promoted inclusive growth. Now, let me come to my core duty. It's my honor and privilege to deliver this welcome speech on behalf of Honorable Governor of Kerala on this occasion. First and foremost, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran for accepting the invitation to share his experience and expertise with us on the manner in which Indian economy has embraced the monumental challenge of Vikasit Bharat, that is, a developed India by 2047, and making rapid strides by demonstrating exceptional resilience and dynamism when global growth continues to face strong headwinds. We are also eager to get valuable insights from you on the economic prowess of India, its huge potential, and roadmap ahead to transform India into an economic superpower. Sir, we are truly honored to have you here in Raj Bhavan, Kerala. We all are waiting with bated breath to hear more from you. Sir, I extend you a very warm welcome on behalf of Honorable Governor of Kerala. Now I welcome the august audience for sparing valuable time and for your encouraging presence. I am confident that your thoughtful contribution during the question-answer session would be an icing on the cake. Last but not least, I also welcome Honorable Governor of Kerala, Shri Rajendra Vishwanath Arlekarji, the guiding light not only for this event but also for all our endeavors of Raj Bhavan, Kerala. We all know that Honorable Governor Sir has been enriching the society with his nuanced knowledge and experience, providing a wealth of information and constant inspiration. The Honorable Governor of Kerala will deliver the presidential address embellished with concise and sagacious motivational insights. Now, I conclude and once again welcome our esteemed guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran and everyone who are here to make this occasion a memorable and impactful experience. Thank you very much. Nanni, Namaskaram, Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. I kindly invite Honorable Governor Sri Rajendra Vishwanath Arlekar, sir, for presidential address.
Namaskaram. On behalf of Raj Bhavan, Kerala, and on behalf of all the staff here, I welcome you for this very informative, innovative session by Dr. Anantha Nageswaran ji. On the dais along with me here are himself V. Anantha Nageswaran ji, my Principal Secretary Shri Devendra Singh Dhodawat ji, and in the hall here, you all are here, august audience, very intellectual, highly placed people in the society, I am overwhelmed to welcome you, receive you in this hall, in this Raj Bhavan. Raj Bhavan has, for many years, I will not say in the last few years, but earlier it was a concept that Raj Bhavan has to be a secluded one, away from the people, away from the society. And the Raj Bhavan, the gates of Raj Bhavan were never open for all of us. And just while passing by, we just used to see the gates, and we never knew when the governor will pass by and we will just have a glimpse of him. I am narrating my experience. I always used to get fascinated when a governor's car passes by, and then we used to just look at. But today's situation is quite different. We all have decided that Raj Bhavan is not only for the governor or the Rajyapal himself who stays here. We have decided that Raj Bhavan should be a Lok Bhavan. It is not only for the governor, it is for the people of the state. It is their asset. So all people should be invited for many occasions. Today, we have organized a well thought talk by Sri Anantha Nageswaran ji. Many of you must be knowing, those who are in economic field, those who are watching and monitoring our country's progress, economic progress particularly. For them, this name is not unfamiliar. Many of us must be very familiar with this, the progress of our country, progress the government does at the center, and all that has been before us. Few days back, or few months or years back, we used to think that whether our country will be a Vikasit Bharat, a developed country. And nowadays, we feel that it is not a dream, but it will be a reality. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi ji, has placed before us that by 2047, we will be a Vikasit Bharat, a developed nation. But it is not just a day that will be coming in the year 2047. It is a very big journey for all of us. What that journey means, how are we going to achieve that? And nowadays we also hear, we listen to some speeches, some comments, and from the people in the government, that our country will be third largest economic power in the world, third largest economy. What does that exactly mean to us? What is my role in whole this journey or the progress? We all will be very happy to see our country third largest economy in the world within next few years. But does that mean anything to me? That is the question that we have to search for and answer for again. And I thought Sri Anantha Nageswaran will be the proper person, the most proper person to say something over this, and we will be getting into this topic. My only request to all of us, all of you here, including myself, we will understand what his thoughts are. His thoughts are not for him only. His thoughts are for all of us, for the society and for the country. Whether we will be getting ourselves into all those process, That is the question to be answered. At the end of the talk, I think we will be answering this particular question positively. That is what we are trying to do here. I hope you all will be enlightened by this lecture, and I thank all of you here having come, having spared yourself for this particular program, for this lecture. I once again thank you and welcome you. Nanni.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, for the lecture on the topic Global Economic Trends, India's Challenges and Prospects.
Oh, yeah, that's one. This is for him. Okay, thank you. This is good. This is good. Honorable Governor to the State of Kerala, His Excellency Shri Rajendra Vishwanath Arlekar ji, Dr. Davendra Kumar Dodavat, Additional ACS to the Governor, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is not only an honor and privilege to be invited by the Honorable Governor to share my thoughts with you on the state of the world. I must also proudly state or declare that it is a sort of homecoming for me, because not many people would know, even though they know that I grew up in Madurai. My maternal roots are in this state. My mother was born in Kodungalur, and of course she grew up in Chennai, but her father and grandfather, etc., they all had their roots in this state. And therefore, it always gives me great joy, even if it is a short trip, to be able to come back here and smell the soil, visit the temples, eat the food, and go back with pleasant memories. And with that initial remarks, I must say that this presentation, I have to start by saying this presentation was put together as of this date, as of this hour, minute, and second. You know why? That is how rapidly things are changing. So if, for example, just before I came here, I read the news that President Trump has chosen to leave the G7 summit in Canada earlier than scheduled. And he is going to be in the Situation Room. Some of you may know the Situation Room in the White House is like a crisis monitoring room. And apparently, he has also asked that the National Security Council be present in the Situation Room as well. So that kind of tells you the rapidity with which things are changing. So some of this presentation material, which was put together 3-4 days ago, I will clarify some of the risks that have developed in the course of the last 72 to 96 hours to the overall story that we are painting here. But nonetheless, I can give you a preview that the story is, as far as India is. Please, sure. It is coming on the screens there for the audience also. Huh? I can see it. So they also see. Okay, thank you. So I understand now that the slides are visible to you. So without much further ado, I'll continue with my remarks. It's a slightly long presentation, but I hope it's interesting enough. First thing, the Global Uncertainty Index. Two professors put it together, but you can see that by and large, their index captures it very well. Although it is purely based on data, on news flow, this index highlights the fact that around 2016, when Brexit happened, around 2008, when the global financial crisis happened, 2020, 21 when the pandemic happened, or maybe for that matter when Russia-Ukraine war happened. And then now you can see that the level of uncertainty is rising and may well go above the previous highs during the pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. And this data goes all the way back to about 3 decades. In other words, in 3 decades, we may be heading towards the most uncertain phase in the world. And what does it mean? Which means people will generally prefer the status quo. They will not risk new ventures. They will not send capital across borders as much as they used to. So, and in general, countries would try to go inward, as would human beings. So, this is the macroeconomic consequence of uncertainty. There will be a sense of paralysis, hesitation, unwillingness to act, just to pull back into the shell. That will be a dominant tendency if this uncertainty keeps rising. And one consequence of that, as you see here, global, as I said, global foreign investment flows have been coming down, especially in the last, every time after the uncertainty spikes happens, there is a level shift downwards. So global foreign direct investment flows will come down, and they are coming down. And we as a country that run a current account deficit, we do depend on foreign direct investment. The good news is India remains a top destination. In 24-25, we attracted $81 billion of gross foreign direct investment. We also allowed a lot of businesses to take profits and exit. That's also an important ingredient of attracting new money. Only when the old money can leave with profit, it will come back with more new money. So India is likely to be an exception to this declining trend. But world exports will slow down. And it is slowing down. In fact, only one country dominates global exports by and large. Some of you who may be reading international press, yesterday New York Times has come out with an article as to how despite US imposing restrictions on goods from China, China's exports to every other part of the world in this calendar year has increased tremendously, affecting businesses from Germany to Brazil to Indonesia, etc. So that's the reality of the slowing global exports and concentration of global exports in the hands of one single country. And this is what this slide shows you. This slide, prepared by Axis Bank, tells you very clearly on the left side, United States is the world's biggest importer. Take out the United States, world imports are sideways. Similarly, on the right side, China is the world's biggest exporter. Take it away, world exports are going nowhere. In other words, one country consumes more than what it produces, another country produces way too much compared to what it consumes. This imbalance is at the heart of the macroeconomic uncertainty. This imbalance has to be rectified. Some people correctly argue tariffs are not the only way to rectify this imbalance. Yes, America wants to produce more, and tariff they think is the first step. But as I said, there could be many other elements that need to come together for this imbalance to be rectified. But China as a country is very sure that it does not want to grow its consumption. It wants to be a global manufacturing powerhouse, and for them it is a strategic goal. In 2021, after the 19th Central Party Committee meeting, President Xi Jinping said, we have to make the world depend on our manufacturing and not the other way around. So they have made manufacturing a strategic weapon, a strategic priority. So therefore, the United States' effort to bring back manufacturing is not going to be met by China raising its share of consumption. That seems like a very remote prospect at this point, and that is not good news for the world. Coming specifically to India and China, we all know that India imports from China are about $108 billion in 2024, and exports were about $15 to $18 billion. So we have roughly around $90 billion of bilateral trade deficit in goods with China. Whether it is components for renewable energy, solar power generation, whether it is active pharma ingredients, API, capital goods, whether it is for infrastructure building. There are a lot of items we depend on China, not just finished goods. So the more we depend on them for upstream goods, the more vulnerable we are. And therefore, this is something that is going to become urgent in the coming years, because not only China, every country, as I told you at the beginning, is going to go inward. They would want to protect themselves to make sure that whatever is produced stays first for their own consumption. And we are not the only ones who are going to be like that. So therefore, the vulnerability of dependence on one source for many products is something that will become much sharper in the coming years, and that is where our focus has to be. Every one of us has to think of what are the other sources we can rely on. What are the other sources we can consider as an alternative to China? If we are importing only from China, are there other countries? And even if it is slightly more expensive, is it worth the risk of depending on a so-called cheaper source, but the risk is the source may be cut off one day, as it is happening in the case of the magnets for automobiles. You can't produce anymore. That's a much bigger risk. So how do you account for the cost of complete stoppage of production? Do you factor that cost into your calculations before you decide whether China is cheaper or not cheaper? So this is the kind of thinking that has to permeate individuals, businesses, private sector, public sector, etc. And this slide shows you that in several product areas, as I told you, we depend on China to a large extent, whether it is, digital processing machines, lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, antibiotic ingredient, penicillin, and therefore you can imagine the vulnerability. And this is same for the United States as well. They also depend on China for many of these products as well. And monocrystalline silicon ingot is one of the inputs going into the solar panels, the modules, okay? And therefore, in other words, it is to the credit of China that they have made themselves indispensable when it comes to global manufacturing. And that is what we have to aim for it also in our own way. We have to make ourselves indispensable to the world. Just as they took 30 years to get to this point, we can use the next 30 years to make ourselves indispensable, because the world is realizing the vulnerabilities of depending on China, which is also a non-democratic system of governance, etc. Whereas we are much more, we have checks and balances, so we can develop ourselves as a more reliable, trusted alternative source in the world, because we have the size. Vietnam, Mexico, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia don't have that size to be able to even have a shot at matching what China has done in the last 30 years. That is our opportunity. And in a way, President Trump's tariffs, of course, right now we are at a pause, 90-day pause from April 9th. So we don't know what happens on July 9th. We don't know what will happen on August 12th, when China has its 90 days from May 12th, the day they met in Geneva. That 90-day finishes in August 12th. So we don't know what will happen. But right now, whatever was announced on April 2nd by President Trump on Liberation Day gives India a certain tariff advantages compared to other countries. Because one of the mistakes we all make is in looking at the tariff only from the Indian point of view and saying, oh, we have now higher tariff. But what matters is not just your tariff, the one that you face when you export to the US, it also matters what others face. If your competitor is going to face a higher tariff, then you are at an advantage. And that is what is happening to India in few areas. I have highlighted a few areas here where India now has an advantage if these tariffs remain after July 9th. Then it is an opportunity for us to improve and promote labor-intensive manufacturing, footwear, textiles, leather products, chemicals, etc. We can actually now reclaim the lost market share. So these first two sections have basically dealt with the global situation, uncertainty, the China challenge for the United States, the imbalance, and India's situation vis-a-vis China. This is the backdrop. And I told you about the recent, today's geopolitical developments. But this is the backdrop. In this context, how are we placed? What are we looking at for India? First of all, most of you know that this is the goal, to become a developed nation. That indicator, metric for developed nation, according to the World Bank definition, is if you have a per capita income in today's prices of more than $11,200, then you are a developed nation, above that level. 4,000 to 11,000 is considered middle income. And I don't know the exact range, but up to 4,400, you are lower middle income. So we are no longer a low income or a poor income country. We are considered a lower middle income country. The moment the per capita GDP crosses $4,400, which is roughly will translate into something like $6.3 trillion at today's prices for India, then you will become a middle income country. And then upper middle income, and then upper income or rich country. So that is our goal. But ultimately, as you said, we talk in terms of per capita. That is the most important thing. We don't talk in terms of aggregate number. And that is where I think ultimately the purpose of talking in per capita is that the fruits of development have to reach each and every one. All of us should feel the development's success. Otherwise, it is somewhat meaningless. That is why the real mission is generating 8 million jobs a year, increasing the share of manufacturing in India's GDP, which will contribute to generating those 8 million jobs, making Indian businesses part of the global value chain. That's what I said, India should be an indispensable player in the global value chain. Create what in the German language they call a Mittelstand, which means the mid portion of the economy, the manufacturing, small, micro, small and medium enterprises, MSME sector. And for that, the investment rate in the economy has to increase to 35% from today's 30%. Therefore, what can we do to make this happen in the context of the challenge of the external environment is not going to be as benign as it was for East Asia. Between 1960 and 1990, or between first 1945 and 1965 or 70, Japan managed to rise from the ashes of the Second World War and become a developed country. Then from 70 to 90 or 95, we had 25 years of East Asian countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, etc. And then from 2001 onwards, or maybe mostly from 1979 when China began to reform. The dates can be flexible depending on when you want to measure the starting point, but roughly from 1990 onwards, for the last 25 years, China has risen. All these 6 major East Asian powers could do so in a relatively stable environment globally, but that is not going to be available to us. If anything, for the next 10 to 15 years, we are going to face a much more unpredictable, volatile, and dangerous geopolitical environment. And geoeconomics also is going to be quite uncertain. Therefore, our challenge is greater externally. Internally, of course, our country is unique in terms of the size, and we are trying to do this within the democratic framework. So you can imagine how exciting at one level, but also how challenging at another level India's development journey is going to be in the next 25 years. We are on the right track to be able to get to where we want to get to. In the last 11 years, in particular, one of the things we used to be feeling somewhat embarrassed about, our state of our roads, our airports, the time it takes to handle goods once they arrive in our port, etc. In these areas, we have a very visible improvement in the last 11 years. The length of the national highways, the number of Vande Bharat trains, the port handling time. I can tell you a small anecdote. When we saw the container turnaround time in India, when we were writing the economic survey, it was even lower than the turnaround time in Kuala Lumpur or Singapore port, and we thought it is a typo. It can't be possible. But we checked, double-checked, and triple-checked, and that number is true. Barring Chinese ports, Indian ports are now turning around the goods arriving here much faster than even some of the East Asian ports, barring China. And more importantly, look at the statistics on number of airports. What we built in the first 67 years since independence, we doubled it in the last 9 years. from 74 to 149, etc. And then the total length of the metro railway in this country, in many cities, totals 1,000 kilometers, etc. So we are addressing the physical infrastructure because that boosts efficiency, reduces cost of transportation, logistics, last mile connectivity. It is an important step in keeping inflation low for the ordinary people. It is not just for statistics, because the last mile logistics cost adds 15% to the final price to the consumer. The more efficient the infrastructure, we are going to see inflation average levels come down in the coming years compared to the past. And you also see the size of the economy. We have grown from $300 billion to nearly $4 trillion as of March 2025. As of March 2025, we were $3.92 trillion. And you see that in the last 7 years or 8 years of GST collections, unified payment interface system driving digital transactions, not only convenience, it also important in terms of understanding trends of consumer spending, patterns of behavior, which districts are doing well, which districts are languishing. So it is not just a question of being able to pay even a 2 rupee purchase with a QR code. It gives you a lot of information about where economic activity is thriving, where it is not. And then the Employee Provident Fund organization data shows you how many people are now getting formal jobs where they are able to contribute to Provident Fund and the employer contributes. This is a sign of formal jobs with protection that is rising. In fact, one of the private sector research agency which used to put out data on employment, calling it a disappointing phenomena, has recently published on June 9th on their website a new set of findings because they realized that their methodology was outdated. And they are now saying that in 23-24 and 24-25, both the quantity and the quality of jobs created in India were much, much better. And 15 million jobs or 1.5 crore jobs were created in both these years. As I mentioned, we need to create 8 million jobs. So we have created almost double the amount of jobs we need to create in the last 2 years. So, and they were the ones who were very concerned about India's employment generation potential, but they understand that their methodology was not estimating the numbers accurately. And if you look at the Ministry of Statistics, in the last 1.5, 2 years, some of you who are interested in this topic would have noticed how much new data that Ministry of Statistics is putting out now. They are also in the process of revising their website. Now they publish monthly data on labor force participation rate, worker population ratio, the unemployment rate, etc. And it is coming out every month. It used to be only once a quarter for urban India, once a year for all of India, and now it is once a quarter for all of India and every month for urban India, etc. So the Ministry of, because ultimately without data and information, you cannot make the right policies. And that is what Ministry of Statistics is working on in a big way. I would urge some of you, especially the younger ones in the audience, to go and visit the MOSPI website and see for yourself the exciting new data that they are putting out on how India is changing right before our eyes. The important thing is India's working age population will keep rising and peaks by about 2035. Afterwards, it will start to slowly decline, not very rapidly. So we still have a window of between 15 to 20 years when we have to make these important changes in the economy, generate jobs, raise the share of manufacturing, raise the savings rate. Our savings rate is good, by the way, compared to every other country in the world except in China. Our savings rate is very good. But again, given the size of the country, given the goals we have, we need to see it rise by another 2 or 3 percentage points. But if you're not able to do that, then it's important that whatever savings we have, we put it to use efficiently. If you can't raise the quantity of savings, you have to raise the efficiency of the investments you do with those savings. And I will come to that. And the other thing that we need to focus on, naturally, is very obvious: education. COVID created a huge setback. And it is a setback for school children, for college children, and it was a setback in many countries as well because of the mistaken shutdowns of schools, because children were not carriers at all of the virus. And it was not just confined to India. Every country dealt with children by closing down schools and creating online education, but naturally it robbed them of the networking, of the friendship, social skills, and numeracy and reading skills. But the good news is the annual State of Education report of Pratham shows in the last 2 years, there has been a big improvement in the numeracy and literacy skills of our school children across grade 3 up to grade 8 and grade 12 as well. And the government in the last 2 or 3 budgets has clearly earmarked enough resources for school education, for online learning, for learning in multiple languages, new television channels and digital channels, etc. And 5 national centers of excellence are being set up for skilling purposes. So education and skilling both have to go together. And when it comes to government finances, ultimately we have to do all of these things without overspending. And India is one of the few countries in the world post-COVID which has been able to achieve a good economic growth rate even while improving the budget numbers. How do I say that? Ultimately, the market is the best judge. Today, the gap between how much India is able to borrow as a government for 10 years in the market, the bond market, the gap between India's borrowing cost and America's borrowing cost, I'm talking about the governments, the gap between the two has never been as small as it is today, any time in the history. That is, we are able to borrow at interest rates not too different from the cost of American government's borrowing for 10 years in the bond market. That is the proof that the market gives India high marks for the fiscal management post-COVID. And this is the current state of play post-COVID, what we have achieved. But we have to look at the next 20, 25 years. What are the priority areas? Education, skilling, mental and physical health of the young cohort, 15 to 29 years. Energy affordability, energy transition. Rise of manufacturing, food security and agricultural productivity, employment generation, and managing that in a world of artificial intelligence. How to raise the investment rate in the private sector, and how to do it in a fair manner. As the Honorable Governor said, ultimately the fruits of growth have to be shared equally and fairly between capital owners and labor owners. That is important. So skill gap, first we'll start with the education and skilling gap. 10 years ago, based on a test conducted by CII and a company called VBox, it is a test administered to students who are finishing college or those who are about to finish college 1 year later. That test, only 1/3 passed the test 10 years ago. Now 51% passed the test. It's conducted every year. It is still roughly 1 in 2 don't pass the test, which means we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. But this is an important challenge for us. Continue to raise the skill level of the youngsters in the country. And there are multiple plans that the governments, both union and state governments are doing across the country, and these are some additional points. Digital literacy must be universal across schools. Human-centric skills are going to be important in the world of AI. We have to make skills to do with our hands more fashionable. It is not going to be possible for all of us to become computer engineers or software developers in a world of artificial intelligence. That will create a code within few minutes. So therefore, things that we can do with our hand has to become more respectable. So vocational skills have to come back. Carpenting, plumbing, electrical, and even skills like counseling, mental care, elder care, all these things, even hairdressing, all these things are going to be much more scarce, which cannot be done by AI. That is the kind of rethinking our mental wires has to happen in the coming years. And for that, parents, teachers and students have to rewire their brains as to what is seen as a sought after job. That very framework has to shift in the world of AI. And modular credentialing system to allow reskilling and upskilling. We cannot say your degree is done only with 3 years or 4 years. There should be opportunities for people to come back and reskill themselves without any stigma attached to it. So how the education infrastructure, the regulatory structure is organized, that also has to undergo a change. Because what we are witnessing is a discontinuity in the way the world is organized. And more importantly, India faces a silent epidemic of unhealthy food consumption. Today, American companies and Western companies which sell breakfast cereals, potato chips, sweets and chocolate find India as the most attractive market. That's not good news. If you want to reap the demographic dividend, you don't just need an educated and skilled population, you need a healthy population. And obesity rates are rising in India. This article is 2 years old almost. You can imagine the numbers now rising in the last 2 years. So you need a physically fit India for it to be a productive India. And ultra-processed foods is a $2,500 business. And misleading advertisements, celebrity endorsements, and missing or obscure labeling on packages targeting consumer behavior are happening. Ultra-processed foods are directly associated with exposure to cancer, respiratory, cardiovascular, and gastrointestinal health outcomes. Poor dietary intake, I'm going to come to that, is associated with adverse mental health. And ultra-processed food brands also target children and adolescents. So our role, while this is a message for the private sector to be socially responsible, it is also a message for all of us as parents, as sisters and brothers and siblings, as educated people, to read what we are buying and to think about the health consequences of ultra-processed foods. So for example, having a chocolate or a potato chip and spending time in front of a screen is the most unhealthy way of spending our leisure hours. So these are the things that we at ordinary family levels can do, because there is something called the Sapien Labs in Kriya University in Andhra Pradesh on the border of Tamil Nadu. And they have found out that if you are not addicted to digital addiction, then your mental health score is very high. And those who are extremely addicted, they say that their mental health is very poor. So those who are extremely addicted have mental distress, very high mental distress, the green bar. And those who are extremely addicted to consuming digital content, social media, always on Facebook, Instagram, etc., creating YouTube shorts, etc., they face mental distress and higher suicidal thoughts. I would urge you to pick up a copy of the book called The Anxious Generation by Professor Jonathan Haidt of New York University. And that is why his book has got so much of traction in many countries around the world that they are now banning children up to age 12 bringing smartphones to the classrooms. And you can see that if your mental well-being score is negative, you are likely to miss so many days at work. Absenteeism means low productivity, low output. And higher the mental health score, there are ways to measure it, you only miss less than 10% of the working days in a month. So, in general, specific to India, 50% of young people in India are struggling with their mental health. Approximately 30% of them have suicidal thoughts. This is based on a sample-based survey. 35% of them feel detached from reality. How do you improve this? Actually, if you go back and read this report from the Sapien Labs in Kriya University website, you can see that the way to change this is to go back to your roots. Learning to speak in your mother tongue or local language. Physical time out in the community, in the playground, outdoor activity. Having a circle of friends and eating healthy food and less screen time. These are all the activities, and family connect. being connected to your family, your parents, your siblings. So things that our elders used to emphasize are the ways to de-addict oneself from digital content and avoiding inability to concentrate, suicidal thoughts and mental distress. So this is where I think these are all not just responsibility of the governments in the country. Each and every one of us have a role to play in ensuring that demographic dividend is realized. The more we postpone the introduction of giving a screen to our children, the more likely they are to become mentally healthier, being able to concentrate, being able to read books, etc. The moment we introduce a smartphone into their hands or a screen or an iPad just to give ourselves some time from the age 6 or 5, then you are making them potentially unproductive citizens and also citizens with mental complications. And moving on from education, mental, physical health, etc., the next important item is how do we manage this global warming energy transition? We say we have to move away from coal, oil, gas to nuclear, solar, wind, etc. But then the Western world became developed using oil, coal, and gas. And now, in the name of global warming and climate change, we are being denied that. And at the same time, everything is becoming electrified. Electrons are becoming more and more in demand. From your cars to computers to smartphones to everything that we use is no longer done manually, whether it is your grinder or a dishwasher or a microwave or scooters. Everything is becoming electrified, needs more energy, and you are told that you cannot use the cheapest forms of energy like coal because they are polluting. So India has an additional complication which even China didn't face in the last 30 years. So this global warming discourse has become much louder now, and India has to find a way to balance the two. And the important risk is that the more you use solar and wind, they are intermittent. Even on a sunny day, 1 hour of cloud cover can make the output of a solar power plant go up and go down dramatically. You have to have backups. That backup has to have investments, therefore. So this is the challenge that India faces. And some of you know that Spain in April had a 9-hour blackout. And there was one agency which is involved in the transmission of energy in Spain actually saw this coming. And I have given you extracts from their annual report. Basically, when you introduce more and more intermittent energy like solar and wind into your grid, we just don't know what will happen. That is, as we say, unknown, unknown. That is the problem. So what is the answer? The answer is, do the intermittence power generation introduction into the grid more slowly. That is why the budget of February 2025 has introduced the important element of nuclear energy. We said we will throw open nuclear energy to the private sector. We will create small modular reactors. It's very important because the world has no precedence for having so much of solar and wind energy coming into the grids. And the grids are not ready for it with the intermittency. And if we have to create backups for everything, then what is the point? It's double the investment cost. So, so that is the challenge that India faces. So given the fact that by 2029-30, we will have these multiple sources of energy, we have to therefore do the following on the right side. Coal will remain critical. Efficiency of thermal has to be improved with supercritical and ultra supercritical power plants, which is what the government has been working on in the last few years. Renewables will continue to increase, driven by our commitment to clean energy, but all in proportion, in moderation. A diversified energy mix will provide baseload power, ensure grid stability with nuclear, thermal, or natural gas. But one of the things that we have not taken into consideration, we're talking only about supply. What about demand? How are we adding to the burden? This is where we can play a role as well. India cannot have the per capita vehicle ownership that America has, with much larger land space, etc. So, for example, we are creating metros in every city. How are we making use of it? And policymakers have to provide the last mile connectivity between metros and buses and neighborhoods and so on. That is the job of the policymakers. The job of the citizens is to make sure that we actually do not attach prestige to private modes of transport, but look at convenience. Because if everybody in India were to have the same per capita vehicle ownership as the developed countries have, there will not be any movement on the roads. We will all be stuck in the same place. So this is a mindset shift that we also have to adopt if we have to meet the twin challenges of energy demand and supply for a large country like ours. The other dimension with this renewable energy is dependence on the world. Look at the number of countries we have to depend on to get lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, you name it. So if you are going to do too much of electric vehicles, if you're going to do too much of renewable energy, your dependence on the rest of the world will continue at least for the next 10 years. And that is the world that is becoming more and more dangerous, more and more polarized. So today it is a magnet that is not coming for your cars. Then tomorrow it could be a monocrystalline silicon ingot for your solar panel. So we have to understand it is not going to be easy. So one of the things that I want to leave with you is to understand the complexity of policy making in today's world. So many variables we have to juggle with, okay? We cannot simply criticize India is not doing enough on solar and wind. In fact, if you do more on solar, wind and electric vehicles, you will increase your dependence on China. Every single EV that you sell, every single solar panel we install, for the time being, will raise our dependence on one single source. And more importantly, we collect so much of revenues from petrol and diesel, which will also become a challenge if we convert more and more into electric vehicles. Then, the third dimension. Ultimately, becoming a manufacturing player in the world and creating a Mittelstand both go together, and job creation. Today's developed world, Japan, Germany, Singapore, or for that matter, the UK in the old years, did not become manufacturing players without having a vibrant small and medium enterprise sector. And that is where the focus has to be. And two ways to do it, deregulation and targeted training. And government has been doing a lot, both union and state governments in the last several years on creating more productivity and growth in the SME sector. New value chains, solving the problem of access to finance, so many credit guarantee schemes, receivables exchange, TREDS system, and creating MSME clusters, etc. Much has been happening, but much more can be done, and we will go into that. The area where we can do a lot more is deregulation. And that was the theme of the economic survey. The economic survey that we brought out on January 31st focused on deregulation. I would urge some of you who are interested to pick up chapter 5 of the economic survey. Today, state governments have rules which prevent 50% of an industrial plot is lost to building standards. 20% wage discount for women workers because some women are not allowed from some factory processes. 2 times more floors are required to construct the same number of rooms for a hotel compared to a hotel in Singapore. 65% higher production costs for iPhones than Japan due to our limitations. I'll show you some of them. See, by the time we wrote the economic survey, we are able to show you that 3 important rules, the setback, parking space, and the floor area coverage, today will limit the ground floor use available. Almost 100% of the ground floor cannot be used for a micro and small enterprise from Kerala to Maharashtra to Odisha to Punjab to Tamil Nadu. Basically, we create so much of requirement, green cover, setback, parking space, and a very low build-up area ensures that if somebody is very compliant, he or she as an entrepreneur cannot use the ground floor at all. How can you then create a factory by starting from the first floor? How will you move equipment? How will you move finished goods, raw materials? Everything becomes more expensive. But after we produce this in the last 3-4 months, some change has happened. You can see the next slide. Look at Punjab now. And look at Orissa, where it was and where it is now. So they are realizing These state governments are realizing that their rules are preventing ground floor being used. And they are therefore modifying the requirement such a way that the fixed cost of doing business comes down. Once the fixed cost of doing business comes down, they can create more jobs. So that is the power of deregulation. The second dimension is the parking space requirement. Even Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand, etc., do not specify you must have this many two-wheeler parking spaces, this many car, this many trucks. That depends on the business. That depends on the people's conveyance facilities they have in that area. Why should the governments of the day be prescriptive about these things? Of course, you don't want the public space to be used for parking. You have to create some parking space, but it cannot be prescribed as a one-size-fits-all rule. We have covered this in the economic survey as well. The other thing is to say that you must have a minimum road width of 7 to 10 meters or 9 meters, etc. The problem is 80% of even urban roads in India don't have a width of more than 8 meters. So if you say that you cannot set up a factory unless the road width is 9 meters, no factory will come up there. So the answer is to prescribe those requirements depending on data. What is the average modal or the modal road width in that state? And accordingly prescribe. In fact, this rule affects even peri-urban areas because some of them don't become become urban. They are still called rural. And then if you can't locate factories because these kind of road prescriptions are there, then what happens? Everything gets crowded into urban areas. There is no balanced development that happens. This is how existing urban centers become overcrowded, overpopulated, and a greater demand on resources, sewage, drainage, water facilities, power, etc. And they become impossible to navigate, traffic jams, etc., etc. in the big metros. They are no longer livable because we prevent factories from getting spread out. These are all the actions that can be taken at the level of state governments. Next, the number of processes which women are not allowed to work because they are considered dangerous. Today, women are graduating out of National Defense Academy. They are in combat roles, but still we say if some occupations are dangerous, they should be dangerous for both men and women. Excepting for pregnant women, we should let the employer and the employee decide where women can work. And by shutting out women from different jobs because they are deemed dangerous, we are preventing them from earning higher wages. That is what I said. Our rules are giving women a wage discount, not a wage premium. So we complain about the low women's participation in the labor market, and we look for very grand answers. But the answers are lying in these kinds of small rules where different states are prohibiting women from working in specific occupations and vocation deemed dangerous, which was set some 30, 40 years ago when technology was not developed, etc. So, and then electricity tariff. We are the only country in the world where the cost of supply for industrial tariff is higher than the cost of tariff for urban and non-industrial users. Look at Vietnam. Industrial tariff is lower than non-industrial tariff. And risk-based regulation. For example, no objection certificate for fire safety. Every state requires it to be renewed every year or 2 years. Some state 3 years, Bihar and Gujarat. Maharashtra is the only state that gives you forever and then does random inspections. In some cases, you can allow third-party certification because the government resources are stretched. One inspector has to look at some 2,000 factories. How will he or she do it? So by allowing third-party certifications, we can release the burden on limited government resources, enabling them to concentrate on development activities also, or extending the validity of the certifications and using random inspections. So the good news is we have done a lot on deregulation as we show in the phase 1, but we can do these things in phase 2. So we still have a lot of low-hanging fruits, lot of juice to extract. by deregulating in all these areas. And I'm glad to inform you that that is what many states have done, as I showed you earlier, on the building land use and building requirements. States like Punjab, Orissa have begun to act on those requirements. And that is the key to MSME growth, to manufacturing, to employment generation. And this data shows you that the more you deregulate, the more industrial activity picks up in the state. This is a study that shows there is a positive impact of deregulation. Business Reform Action Plan 2020, the more you implement it, the greater the increase in industrial gross value added in that state. So there is a positive correlation, there is a payoff to deregulating. I'll go faster here. Agricultural growth is another area where we still have a lot of juice to extract. Productivity in agriculture can be improved by increasing the area under irrigation. We have done very well in terms of micro irrigation, but look at the output growth in food grains and other areas. Other areas we are growing at high single digits. In food grains we are growing only at 2%, 1.9%. So one of the weaknesses to improve irrigation cover. Surface water irrigation has come down, groundwater extraction has increased throughout the country. And that needs to flip, this line needs to flip, which is where rainwater harvesting and micro irrigation systems become very important. That again is a matter of private sector and public action as well. And land consolidation, we still have too much of micro land ownership, which is not possible to optimize production in such small sizes. So land consolidation, which means land records, digitization, clear title, and ability to convert land from farming to non-farm use. That is the biggest area of reform that needs to happen for land productivity to be unleashed in the country. And that will lead to better yield as well. We are still well below the global average in several areas. So agriculture can actually contribute another 0.5% to 0.75% to annual economic growth if we take care of irrigation, land productivity, and also by allowing market forces to work. And moving on to creating employment, I said we have to create 8 million jobs a year. That is covered in the economic survey in July 2024. We have done the calculations. So how do we do that? As I told you, CMIE has now shown that in the last 2 years, employment generation has picked up by more than 1.5 crore people in 23-24 and 24-25. That's a good news. And so how do we generate more employment? That is what the previous section tried to show you. Deregulation, allowing MSMEs to grow, to remove the fear of growth, reduce the fixed cost of doing business, and giving them more space to, therefore, increase the variable cost by hiring. And private sector, the corporate sector, has to introduce technology in the country very carefully and selectively, keeping one eye on job creation. In the short term, it is profitable. In the medium term, it can be a threat to social stability if we overdo technology and underdo hiring, or even remove people from jobs and hand it over to machines. It's a fine balancing act. It requires both an awareness of profitability and an awareness of medium-term social stability, which is important for profitability. Without medium-term social stability, you cannot sustain profitability. So there is no conflict between the two in the medium term. And that is a responsibility of the private sector. And now AI is coming for white-collar jobs. 12 years, 10, 12 years later, robots may replace physical labor as well. So we have to be prepared for this transformation happening, and as a society we have to decide at what level we stop this and up to what level we allow this. It's a trade-off, like everything. And this trade-off is becoming that much more acute for a country of our size, given the numbers we have compared to any other country. And the private sector has to do its nation building in the following areas: balanced deployment of capital and labor, curbing the marketing of ultra-processed foods, we saw that earlier, fair distribution of income between capital and labor, workplace safety, workplace culture and mental health is important. Indian businesses and Indian workplaces carry too much of stress. strategic thinking for resilient India, looking at the medium term, and investment in research and development. Overall, coming to the last part, you might think that this is all very overwhelming, but remember one thing. We have always faced these questions at any point in time in the last 30 years. India could always be said to be in a country at crossroads, but we have taken the right path. Our GDP growth has come from almost nothing, $100 in the 1960s to now about $2,600 per capita. Okay? And IMF projects that India's GDP, I said, once you cross $6.3 trillion, you will become a middle income country. And IMF is projecting that by FY 30-31, we will be a middle income country. And this is the exchange rate they think Indian rupee will be trading at. This is not a forecast made by the IMF, but it is an implicit forecast. And more importantly, Indian public have more optimism about the future. In developed countries, they don't think that the future generation will be better off compared to the previous generation. But look at developing countries. India, Saudi Arabia, China, Indonesia are towards the right side of the chart, of the table. There, the level of optimism about the future is very high. That's very important. It is optimism that makes people overcome uncertainty and invest in the future. We have that optimism. That's a very, very important strength to ride through. But this challenge that India faces is both intellectually exciting and also ethically and morally demanding of all of us. The action has to happen not just at the policymakers level. I have shared several insights where as citizens, as public, as private businesses, what all we can do from physically fit, being physically fit, to consuming healthy foods, to doing rainwater harvesting, to strike the right balance between capital and labor, technology introduction, and employment generation. There are multiple things that we can do at our level also, not just depending on the public sector. Ultimately, transformation of a society of this size requires a social agreement between the public sector, the industry, academia, and the people. If we have that, then Viksit Bharat will be within our grasp. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now it's time for the interactive session. Anybody from the audience can ask one or two questions too.
Yeah, it was an excellent talk. You have given a very, a big picture of the challenges and opportunities of Viksit Bharat. You have actually laid out the deregulation possibilities which can actually drive. So one thing I would like to hear from you is the deregulation or risks that we need to take from the perspective of digital divide, where the rural communities are still not connected. For everybody who is holding a mobile phone, there is one person who is not able to get that access to. So what is your take on the regulations or the re-regulations in the rural communities? Thank you so much.
No, I agree. I think, but one of the most important actions that the government has taken in the last several years is the cost of data in India is one of the lowest. That is both good and bad, because cost of data is so low. As I said, people are consuming a lot of non-productive content on social media and YouTube, etc. But data cost being so low also enables classrooms to happen virtually, and it applies, the low cost applies to both rural and urban India. But the most important thing is many parts of the country may not be accessible through wireless communication. So, and fixed line bandwidth is, fixed line broadband connectivity is an important component of ensuring that rural India and urban India are not faced with a huge disparity in terms of connectivity, and that is where the Ministry of Telecom is also focused on.
You mentioned demographic dividend.
Yeah.
You mentioned demographic dividend. As you know, more than 50 Fortune 500 companies are headed by Indians. Incidentally, the first Indian CEO of an MNC was a Malayali. Now my question is, how confident are you that this demographic dividend will be reaped by India and not by other countries? Thank you.
Well, in a way, the other countries are helping us by making it more and more difficult for people to move in, and also the society is becoming more polarized in their own country. So naturally, people find that India is a much more stable place than, because the kind of West that I went to study in 1990s is not the West that my own children who are currently in the US studying are finding it. In fact, without me even saying anything, both my children are saying, as soon as we finish our graduation and convocation is over, we are catching the next flight out. So I think to some extent, the fascination with the West will undergo a change because of the natural changes and society developments that are happening. The second thing that is also going to hold people back automatically is to the sheer prospect for economic growth. With every passing year, if we are able to show that we have a much higher growth potential compared to them, that translates into investment opportunities and opportunities for self-actualization. That is the second magnet that will draw people to stay back. And the third thing is what I said. We need to continue to make it easier for people to start a business, to run a business, to close a business. Tax administration, tax policies, tax certainty, last mile connectivity, all these things which from the public policy side we need to do. But also whatever is happening in the external world will also mean that there will be both pull and push factors working to retain the brains in India. But more importantly, I would also add that I don't see this as a lose-win proposition, even if people go. Ultimately, they do find ways of contributing both in terms of intellectual resources and financial resources. They create the bridges, they create transfer of know-how and R&D, etc. Some of them in fact become much more connected to their roots when they are outside than when they are inside. They don't appreciate it as much as they appreciate when they go out as well. So I don't see this even otherwise as a sort of a situation where we lose and they win. It actually can be a win-win as well.
So you mentioned about this being a responsible citizen, about healthy living, or usage of infrastructure and such kind of things. Like, what is your take on about change of this behavioral nudge of the people of the country? So that is one thing. Another thing is you wanted to see that India to be transformed to become a manufacturing economy. So when we also become a manufacturing economy as a most populous country in the world, do you think that it will again unbalance the world macroeconomy?
So a good point, but I will take the second one. I alluded to this. In fact, I anticipated the question and gave an answer by saying, we are more democratic and we are open to checks and balances as opposed to, let's say, China. And secondly, we are not becoming or wanting to become a manufacturing player in the world, starting from a very low consumption share of GDP. We already have a 61% consumption share of GDP. China never got there. So, in fact, that is why we are still importing lots of goods. So what will happen when we manufacturing reaches 25% of GDP from the current 16-17% of GDP is that our imports will first come down, our trade surplus will increase, and given our size and given our high consumption share of GDP, we will not make the world as unbalanced as it has been the case in the last 30 years with China. The first point, the first question you asked was about
Behavioral nudge? Creating behavioral nudge?
Yes, I think it is a very good point. The behavioral nudges have to come not just through tax and spend policies, but also through social communication, etc., from the government side. But nudges, even in the Western societies, have come to acquire a certain mixed view, whether it is appropriate. One, certain tools are available in the hands of the government, it can be put to use for any purpose. So, and that is exactly what social media companies are doing without us realizing. They are doing nudging all the time by streaming you one particular content, right? And also the kind of advertisements that you see or the feeds that come into you, the moment you click on one particular type of feed, for the next few days only the same kind of feed will come to you on the screen. That's a nudge. So these are all negative elements of the nudge. So how to use nudge also has to come laced with social responsibility.
Sir, good evening. Sadish from Axis Bank. Sir, my question is on the social welfare plans. Whether how a state can manage both social welfare plans and especially simultaneously along with this capital expenditure, which is the need for infrastructure load when moving to a developed nation.
So there are not just one single answer to that question. There are multiple answers. One is always use social welfare also to bring about, as the previous gentleman asked, as a nudge to bring about certain behavioral change on the part of the recipients. In other words, it can be if you are sending your children to school and college, and if you are consuming this kind of food, then this is available to you, otherwise not. So you can use the social welfare spending also to make them mentally and physically healthy and economically productive. That way, they will contribute to economic output, which will generate revenue for the government to do social welfare spending. So, in other words, even with industrial policy, just to digress, protection per se is not bad, but protection has to be tied to performance on the part of the industry, quid pro quo. Similarly, social welfare policies can also be framed in a manner where socially desirable and personally beneficial behavior can be encouraged. That way, you will also create a productive population, reaping demographic dividend, and raising the resources to do both. Apart from revenue mobilization, apart from generating more non-tax revenues, etc., these are all, and economic growth itself is the most important generator of resources, fiscal resources. So continuing to sustain economic growth, tapping into non-tax levers, using social welfare schemes to bring about appropriate behavioral changes that generate economic activity further, etc., or the means by which you can balance both raising money or resources for capital expenditure and continuing to take care of the vulnerable. Of course, more importantly, naturally, these days, every state is doing means-tested programs, etc. And then you also put timelines so that you don't remove the personal incentive for self-improvement. You cannot make people eternally dependent on social welfare. So how do we ensure that we provide a helping hand? At the same time, how do we ensure that we don't rob them of the natural human incentive to improve themselves? If we can find the balance between the two, then you can actually make the social welfare schemes both fiscally and economically sustainable.
I am Dr. Ravi Raman. I'm a member of the Kerala State Planning Board. Thank you so much for your enlightening speech. It's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
You made two exciting statements. One is, to quote, India is rising before our eyes. The other statement that you made is that there is so much juice to be extracted. Am I right? Yes. Then my question is this, that don't you think that we need to be more careful when we use the word developed? Because the kind of examples that you have taken, Japan and East Asian states, they all made poverty history long back. But in India, the multidimensional poverty index so high. And if you take the case of other thing, that is the juice that is to be extracted, and the solution that you suggest is deregulation, then it simply goes along with the narratives that we need to work not for 40 to 48 hours, but 70 hours, or even 90 hours. And also you know well that in most of the Indian states, the Factories Act are increasingly being violated. just for increasing the number of hours. But at the same time, you know well, better than me, that the wage share in value added in India is either stagnant or declined. So what does it mean? Are we talking about the developed economy status or developed country status? If it is developed country status, you must be able to make poverty history, which is not going to happen. So coming back to a small state like Kerala, if I say, given the fact that the social development is much advanced, Kerala, a state, might be able to reach the developed country status much before we can imagine for India as a whole. I would like to know your response.
So first of all, thank you for your comments. I see them more as comments than questions. Yes, you made a point about some of the observations made may lead in the direction of saying everybody should work 70, 90 hours. No, obviously, we are not going back to the Dickensian world of exploitation. And like everything else, and you know very well, you have been in the planning board, and you know that public policy has always been, is, and will be about trade-offs. And the more technology that you have, you will be able to identify those who systematically exploit the rules and regulations and also be exploitative of labor. And a small micro entrepreneur is probably as exploited as the labor forces. And also, the acid test or the litmus test of your policy is whether it gives rise to the law of unintended consequences. Recently, the UK government said, we are going to tax all the billionaires from other countries who are parking their ill-gotten wealth and raise more resources. And the outcome was that wealth completely fled the United Kingdom and leaving even little taxes that they were collecting to drop to almost zero. So in other words, you need to always mix, and there is nothing new that I'm saying, you need to mix pragmatism and idealism together and find a way wherein are you going to focus on creating 8 million jobs, or are you going to use rules and regulations in such a way that you will continue to protect and pamper those who already have a job at the expense of creating 8 million jobs? This is a trade-off. And there are no template answers to these questions. And you have to find the right trade-off. And one of the ways and in the same presentation where I talk about deregulation, I also talk about the responsibility of the Indian corporate sector to invest in R&D, to be conscious about the kind of advertising and promotion they do for ultra-processed foods, and to be conscious about introducing capital in a society that has so much of labor endowment. And I talk about the fair division of rewards to capital and labor. In other words, this presentation displays a consciousness between the need to generate jobs and the need to have a fairer society in terms of division of income. It is not one at the exclusion of the other. But finding the right balance is an iterative process. It is not, there is no template out there. So one has to be conscious of managing, using both the rails and not just use one rail. That is exactly my answer to your question.
Sir, one question, sir. Here. Sir, in the initial slides, you narrated that how China became indispensable for last 30 years. So during 90s, how they could sense that during this 25, this after 30 years, these will be the requirements that to be given to the world, because now they have become an indispensable nation. So taking a cue from that, how India could position now so that after 30 or 35 years, India can become like a leading player. So
sure, yeah, that is exactly the various things that were mentioned here. And I don't want to repeat my entire presentation. So how do you make yourself indispensable in some areas? Simply have to, it's about boosting skilling, boosting productivity, allowing, basically the whole idea of deregulation is to remove the fear of growth from micro, small and medium enterprises. Then they will be able to generate the kind of production. We have managed to achieve success in some areas from nothing. Today we are a huge mobile phone exporter. Some people will immediately retort and say, look, the value addition in India is so low. And I have a cricketing analogy for that. Sometimes you have to start batting at number 11, and Ravi Shastri did that before he became the opening batsman over time. So, and similarly, when it comes to software industry, in 2000, we just became indispensable by just debugging the Y2K code. And from there, 25 years later, we have become the global capability centers. And I'm told by the private sector that even AI will not stop the progress of India's GCCs, Global Capability Centers. Similarly, in manufacturing, what we have done with mobile phones, it could be the value addition is increasing slowly today. From single digits, it's to double digits now. But that is where tomorrow we will start making more and more components in India. Whether it is the Tatas or the Foxcons, etc., will keep coming. That kind of success factors need to be replicated in other sectors. We have done that with air conditioners. In air conditioning, we have created an ecosystem where we used to import, our imports have come down dramatically. In fact, the Department for Promotion of Investment and Internal Trade has to write up these case studies. Otherwise, people think the PLI scheme has not worked, but PLI scheme has worked in mobile phones, air conditioners, in bringing back the active pharma ingredient production to India. At least between 4 to 6 sectors, the PLI scheme has increased the domestic manufacturing content relative to imports. So those are all the success factors that have worked in these sectors have to be replicated. And then whatever I said about the deregulation, the private sector investment in R&D, taking care of skilling, these are all the way, and of course geopolitical developments will hopefully, you don't have to become indispensable in every single product area, which is actually both impossible and also unrealistic goal. We need to make ourselves an important player in the global supply chain. Which products we choose, that will be up to us. But the successes that we have demonstrated in the last 10 years in few of those areas shows that it is possible.
So we have a very insightful presentation, sir. It had a variety of different facets of economy, right from your food choices to psychology and whatnot. Wonderful. I, in fact, thank the Honorable Governor also for giving us this kind of an opportunity. Sir, you were talking about going slow on renewables. This is one thing which is causing a lot of concern for me because solar and wind, I think, is our big strength areas. Not being able to put it on grid or not being dependent on other countries for batteries, should it stop us or should we quickly innovate and find some methods of using it much more?
Thank you. So you used the word, initially I said going slow, and then you used the word stop. I never used the word stop. I didn't say. I only said that, like I answered with respect to an earlier question, public policy is about trade-offs. And you have to do it in a manner where ultimately it is a judgment call that today nobody anticipated what happened in Spain. Even Spain didn't anticipate, except for that one annual report extract I showed. The problem is, because there is no precedence for the introduction of so much of intermittent energy into the system, there is no way, basically it's about humility, honestly speaking. When we introduce renewables into the overall installed power capacity, it is about recognizing the unknown. We simply don't know how it will play out. And therefore, we need to understand, we need to generate the economic growth to generate the resources to be able to invest in renewable energy. And to generate that economic growth, you need cheaper energy. And this is how the West got to where it is today. So if we have to get to net zero by 2070, Viksit Bharat comes in 2047, 23 years ahead. So let's get to Viksit Bharat by 2047. That will pave the way for net zero by 2070. Okay? And more importantly, it is about managing the trade-off. It is about the pace of investment. It is about using nuclear energy, it is about using pumped storage, it is about using hydropower, etc. So we need to learn from others' mistakes and leapfrog. And once some of these technologies become affordable and resilient, then we should in fact double the speed. So it's all about tweaking rather than stopping. I never use the word stop.
Sir,
We may wind up the question.
See, I have two questions. One is, we are fast moving towards reaching to the, Vikasit Bharat. But our budgetary expenditure on education is very little. For example, 2025-26 budget you take, the amount that is set apart for education is only 0.36% of our GDP. Think about China or US or any other developed economy. China is not a developed economy, okay. They spend more than 6% of GDP for education. But in India, it is only 0.36% of GDP that is set apart for education. Perhaps more or less the same, or around the same amount is set apart for education in the previous years too. Then another question is about health, expenditure on health. Narendra Modi government has passed a law, a policy, a health policy 2017. And in the policy, the government, government has mandated that 2% of GDP should be spent on health by 2022. Again, another mandate is that state governments should set apart 8% of GSDP on health. But I don't know whether the health ministers in the state knows about this. Anyhow, central government this time has set apart only 0.27% of GDP on health. This is 2025,
Yeah. So,
it is not 2020.
Thank you, ma'am. I understand your question. The only thing I would say is that if only outlays translated into outcomes, historically, we would already have a very high social development index. It is always a mistake to confuse outlays with outcomes. It's about efficiency of the resources. For example, if I was spending 100 rupees on something and only 15 rupees achieved went to the intended beneficiary, and therefore I decide to tighten up and clean up, and today I spend 40%, and the entire 40 is not actually, I have increased my outlay by more than almost 3 times. I have not reduced my outlay. So by curbing efficiency and wastage, I'm ensuring that whatever outlay goes, by curbing inefficiency and wastage, I'm actually ensuring that every rupee I spend actually reaches the intended beneficiary. And therefore, to confuse outlays with outcomes is a mistake. And some of the things that are actually ailing our education, whether it is absenteeism and the teacher availability in the classrooms, are not something that can be fixed by simply allocating more money to the problem. I think we need to understand where the source of the problem is. If more money could solve every problem, then I think we would already have a much higher social development index.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we will have more questions on at the tea time. And now I request Honorable Governor, sir, to present memento to our esteemed guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran ji.
It's my privilege to extend our warm gratitude to our Honorable Governor, sir, for having invited Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, sir, and for presiding over the function. On behalf of Rajbhavan Kerala, I extend our profound thanks to Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, for having accepted our kind invitation and to deliver this inspiring lecture to the elite audience. I take this opportunity to thank the distinguished audience for your esteemed presence. I also thank friends from media and all officials for their presence and making this event a grand success. Thank you. Jai Hind. All are requested to rise for the national anthem.
जनगणमन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलति तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
To join for